Awesome. Hey, Ken, how are you?
I'm doing great. Good afternoon or morning, depending on what time zone you're in.
True, true. Where are you at right now?
I am in Franklin, Tennessee, just outside of Nashville. Fall. It feels like fall has arrived. The weather is perfect. Bright, sunshiny day. All good.
That's awesome. Feels like that too. I'm in Cincinnati, Ohio, and it is very, very fall here. So I'm excited for this new season. And I'm also really, really excited to have you today. I'm just excited for the topic we're going to be talking about and how it can serve churches that we're working with or just need this information. So today we're going to be talking about mistakes of the back office, and I love this title. But before we dive in, I want to introduce Ken and have you talk a little bit about yourself. So, Ken, you believe all mature believers are good stewards, and I know you have a passion for spiritual growth through stewardship. You've had a lot of different roles and are moving into a lot of different roles. Tell us a little about your background. What have you done? What are you doing now?
Sure. Well, I might start with what I'm doing now because that's new. In August of this year, I took a job with Brentwood Baptist Church as their stewardship minister. And Brentwood Baptist is a large multi-site Baptist church here in the Nashville area. And it's a role that's very exciting to me because I get to work with people in the area of spiritual development through stewardship, which is my passion. I believe that when you grow and how you manage your finances, when you grow in generosity, that then you just grow, period. I think we make a great case for that from Scripture. And so that's what I'm doing now. But what led me here was a few decades of a variety of different things. In my when I was in college, I was challenged with the idea that church planting was the most efficient form of evangelism. And I bought into that idea so much that I got involved with the church plant and married the daughter of the guy that challenged me that way, who was one of the church planters. So about 30 years ago, I got involved with a small multicultural bilingual church plant in Miami and served there for a long time doing a variety of different things. Some of that we'll talk about today. I've built a business and sold it. I've been on the staff of two large churches now. So I've done small church, I've done church planting, I've done big church, I've done multicultural, multi-site, bilingual. In the interim there, I was 3-4 years at little over 3 years at Ramsey Solutions, also working there primarily with large churches around the country. So as it relates to this conversation, I've done leadership, I've done finance, discipleship. I've got a pretty my bag is pretty mixed.
That's awesome. I'm really excited to learn from you today. But you're not really a back office guy, but that's what we're talking about today. So why are we talking about this today? Why does this interest you? We're talking about mistakes to avoid in the back office. Why are you passionate about that?
When I first started getting into stewardship ministry, I didn't really know there was such a thing. I came across an organization called the Christian Stewardship Network, and I learned a principle there directly from Scripture that's impacted how I think about basically how we handle the business of the church. And we find it in Luke 16:11. And what Jesus says, and Luke writes, he says, if you've not been trustworthy and handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And the context of that passage is that true riches are the spiritual things that are significant. And Jesus is telling us through that parable, he's like, look, if you can't manage money, I'm not going to give you men to manage. And Paul actually says a variation of that in 2 Corinthians 8:20, which every stewardship pastor goes to like all the time. He says, we're trying to avoid any criticism of the way we administer this liberal gift. And then he goes on to say something really interesting. He says, we are taking pains to do what's right, not only in the eyes of the Lord, but also in the eyes of men. And I'm passionate about this. Paul understands that he's going to give an account for how he manages money people have entrusted to him. He will give that account to God, and he will give the account to men, and the accounts are separate. Each one of them uses they judge in different ways. So Paul could do something with money that's not wrong, but it might not have the appearance of being something wrong. So he was saying God is going to judge him. God knows his actions, but men also have an opinion. And in Paul's mind, he wants to pass God's judgment and to be thought well of by men. We need to learn that lesson. It's foundational to what we're talking about. That's why we need to avoid back office mix-ups. It's primarily a stewardship question and a spiritual question.
That's great. So there's definitely a theological basis for running our offices with excellence then.
There is, I think we should do everything with excellence. And there is a theological basis, but there's a practical one too. If we don't run our offices with excellence, people don't trust us. And if they don't trust us, they don't give. And by the way, if we're not trustworthy, they shouldn't give. So, this is kind of Christian living 101. Let's be trustworthy. Let's be worthy of people's trust.
That's great. How have you seen, or how do you see churches being untrustworthy in their finances?
Oh, well, that's pretty broad. Like, what size church are you thinking about?
Yeah, let's say 300 or less. What would you say?
Well, what I would say, first of all, is that there's a lot written on this. I'm not really the expert, so it feels a little strange maybe to add my voice to that conversation, but I've seen a bunch of things because I've done a bunch of different things. So here's something common that I see. A lot of it has to do with span of control. And this is something that's a special issue for small churches, and I was in this church. So the same person is collecting the offering, depositing the offering, writing the checks, signing the checks, doing the payroll. I've personally done this. When I was involved in a church plant, I had a business office for a company I was running. We managed this function out of my office. And when I was doing it, I knew that I was handling it. I wasn't stealing any money. I wasn't doing anything unethical. I also knew that if anybody looked at it, what I was doing was not above being criticized. So you see how the principle works. And by the way, I was the biggest contributor to the church. Not that creates any potential conflict of interest. So I was doing the right things. I was doing them in a way, maybe it wasn't wrong, but it certainly didn't look good.
Yeah. So what should you have done?
Well, we didn't do everything wrong. We had all our checks needed 2 signatures, so I was at least protected in that way. I couldn't write myself a big check. But if I remember right, I think my wife was actually one of the signatories, at least part of the time. So we needed to fix that or change that. But there were a few easy steps we could have taken that would have made things a little better. For example, I could have had somebody else reconcile the bank statements. Mm-hmm. And actually, eventually I did. I had a bookkeeper for my business who didn't go to the church. It was kind of a special situation, and I had him do it. Or I should just not have been. I just shouldn't have been a signatory, which for the operations of a small church makes a lot of headache, because then somebody's got to go find 2 other people to sign a check. If I were to go do that over again, I think I would just insist that. I think I would insist on those things. I'd always have somebody reconcile the bank statement that wasn't me, and I would make sure that my wife and I didn't sign the checks because the checks were kept in our office. So maybe there's a growth point for the church too. Just the simple fact of needing to own a better quality of system would have been helpful for them.
That's good.
So, but here's the point. So in that situation, a small church plant, literally for much of the time meeting in a storefront, I was in a position of authority over both the church. I served as an elder in the church. I was its interim pastor for a while. And I had basically control over the church business. And so the question to answer is this one. Does what I'm doing rise to the level of being above reproach? And does it appear to would an outside observer think that? It often is not what we are doing, it's what we could do, or what we could appear to do. That's the issue.
Yeah, that's great. So what's a common way that someone with that amount of control over the financial flow of the church could cheat the system?
Sure. A couple easy ways. And I would think about this when I was doing it because my mind just sort of works that way. But the offering came in a sealed envelope that some people at the church had counted, and then I got that envelope. I could have taken the cash out, even though it was written there. It would have been very easy for me simply to steal the cash. But even if I didn't steal the cash, what would have been even easier and nobody would have caught would be to take the cash out, put it in my pocket, substitute a personal check in the same amount, deposit it, and then give myself a tax receipt at the end of the year, which would be easy because I gave the tax receipts. And I can let you know that nobody would have ever figured that out.
Does that happen?
Oh, yeah, that does happen.
Oh.
And by the way, both of those things happen. And the person that's doing it may not intend to do it at first. Maybe they hit like a hard financial patch, and it's the equivalent of like leaving money in front of them to steal. They may believe they're going to pay the money back. That's how they tell themselves that. If you've ever known, and like I've known Christians that have embezzled tens of thousands of dollars at different times, and they do it, they instinctively know what they're doing is wrong. And at the same time, they tell themselves that they're going to make it right. So just the fact that it's there in front of them to do can be a temptation that some people can't manage. But you will read about, no question, what that scenario I just described to you, I wouldn't say that it's common. It's not unusual.
What are some other things you've seen then?
Well, I've seen a lot. You and I were talking a little bit before we got started here. I've known of churches, like large churches, where ushers do swipe cash from the offering, and catching it is tricky. Like I could tell a long story, but where audit teams, and here's what I would say: I'm not sure that that's uncommon. Also, I think I've seen it happen. I think I know of a couple other situations. And it's kind of a part of your question. Like, then it is something else. Like, how are we going to vet volunteers? How are we going to have appropriate auditing systems? And then you have a different problem is, what are you going to do with that person if you actually catch him?
Yeah.
Or her, as the case may be. And it's a real thing. So the mistake is not having a system that catches that. And the larger you are, the more complex those systems need to be, and maybe the more important they are.
No, that's great. That's really good. I like what you said about mistake is not having a system that catches that stuff. That's really good. So we're kind of on this, we're talking about smaller churches currently. So what are some other common mistakes that maybe smaller churches might make?
Yep. I would say the smaller the church, the more difficult it is to be compliant with paperwork. And there's a lot of paperwork, and they don't teach you how to do any of it in seminary. And truthfully, with churches, even if you're a CPA, for example, or an experienced bookkeeper, there may be paperwork you're not familiar with to be compliant. So a common one, your pastor tax exemption letter, which needs to be renewed every year and it should never be backdated. And I don't know how many, I'm guessing there's somebody on this call that either hasn't done that letter or has backdated it. And if there's nobody else, I'll let you know. I'm a guy that has backdated that letter in the past because we forgot to do it. Look, if you're backdating something, you have a system that needs to be improved. Here's another one: paying and filing appropriate employment taxes. And we know that with clergy, that's a whole different game. Like doing that the right way is a lot of effort.
Yeah.
And maybe the last one I'll throw your way is sales tax. Churches are exempt from paying sales tax in most states. In some states, they're not exempt from charging it. So you have like some real kind of funky situations where if you buy content and resell it, like you might need to file that. If you have a vending machine, there's all kinds of different kind of little small things. They're not huge. You're probably never going to get in trouble, but you're not avoiding the appearance of doing something wrong, or at least not the best way.
Yeah.
Those are a few.
Yeah, no, that's great. So for smaller churches, some of the conversations I have with churches is, they have really small teams, they're not really sure who they could trust yet. They want to be a signer because they don't have anybody else on the account yet. And so finding people that you can trust in these financial roles may be harder earlier in your church life, or when you have a smaller congregation. And sometimes even the pastors, like you said, are taking on these additional financial roles to keep things moving. So this is kind of a loaded question, but what are some specific roles maybe smaller churches should have, maybe that they should have in place? Are there any that you would recommend, like outsourcing versus vetting a volunteer for? Because cost is usually an issue with some of our smaller ones. So what roles would you recommend fighting for that are in a church's budget, or vetting the right volunteer for?
I would say I'm going to flip that question back to you in just a second, because with what you do, I know you talk to more churches than I do. My experience is pretty narrow. Yours is broad. If you're asking me, I think anybody that's not outsourcing payroll is making a mistake. Like, just at a very minimum, because it's so, in relative terms, it's inexpensive to do, and being compliant with it can be difficult, and it varies by state and sometimes even by county that you're in. That being said, I think the one essential function you need to pay attention to, somebody in your world needs to have the job of controller, needs to understand what the financial systems are and how they work. So if I'm the pastor of that small church, I'm going to find that person. I'm going to have some job descriptions, whether it's a volunteer or a person or an outsourced service. Like, these are the things that I need. And then I'm going to figure out ways once a quarter, once a month, a couple times a year, to sort of vet what that person is doing against meet with another church that's a little bit bigger, or another one my same size, and find out, hey, how are you guys doing this? What's it look like for you? These are weird things that happen to us. Did those things happen to you? And kind of get some more eyes on it. What do you see?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we serve churches at all different stages, all different budgets. We serve a lot of, younger churches kind of in this range that you're talking about. However, we've started to see a shift probably in the past year and a half, where larger, more established churches are coming back and asking questions about what does it look like to outsource some of the roles that you mentioned. Maybe it's payroll or accounts payable, or just the QuickBooks management or donor management. There's a long list there. But they've had someone that has been their bookkeeper for 30 some years. And a lot of times it's a member of their church, and they leave because they retire or something happens within the church. They've decided to leave, and they're kind of sitting there wondering, what do we do? This person knew so much. So we're having a lot more conversations with churches that are larger or just older, that are looking and researching, what does it look like to outsource certain elements? So it's not one person that's overseeing everything. So we're just starting to see a big shift where we're serving churches in this way now that are older, more established, and that are seeing the value of additional accountability that may not all come directly from inside their church as well.
Most of my experience in business before I went into ministry full time was in outsourced services, not in accounting, but in a particular specific area of healthcare. And it's been interesting as I've onboarded into this new role, which I'm thoroughly enjoying. The church that I'm serving has no IT employees. They have an outsourced group, and this is a big, like a very large church. They have outsourced that entire function. And when I say outsourced, I mean help desk, management of computers, like on-site managing printers, all that. And even, this is interesting, even architecture, strategic design, integration. And watching that, this church, which again is pretty good sized, but we're not in the business of IT. And there's that fine line between wanting to hold something in-house so you can have it close, and wanting to outsource it so you get the collective experience. The company we outsource to basically only serves churches and nonprofits. Like, that's where they live. And I've been pretty impressed with them. I work for Ramsey Solutions. They've got 1,000 employees. They got a whole team of IT people, and that makes sense. Yeah. Even there, they outsource some of their infrastructure. But I think a lot of times outsourcing is a pretty good choice.
That's great. No, that's great. And you mentioned payroll a little bit, and about how that's something you think you should outsource. And again, speaking into the churches that have been coming to us too, we've often found that because they were, maybe doing payroll in-house or with a non-clergy savvy payroll company. In that transition, they've just realized there's been stuff they haven't been doing correctly or in the best interest of their staff. So again, just to reiterate that. So we've talked about small churches, some roles that would be really good, but larger churches now, I'm going to ask the same question. What are roles you definitely should have? Are there any additional roles you would add? What would you hire for versus what could a volunteer do, for example, or a staff person?
Yeah, I think everybody's ministry context is different. And the interesting thing about back office is it's basically all the same stuff that needs to be done. So the only thing that changes is the complexity and the size. So when I think about that small church I was in, I was chairman of the elder board. I was the president of the corporation. I would sign the checks. I did all that stuff. And the church I serve now, I have an office next door to the CFO who's on the executive team. She has a team of accounting people literally on a different floor. It's the same functions. And the most important one there, everybody's important. The hardest one to replace would be the CFO because she's the mastermind behind all those systems. Her background is in auditing. That's how she thinks. Like nobody's ever going to cheat her. That's just not going to happen. That's how her world runs. So I think for larger churches, maybe like I still think I'm sending payroll out. I think larger churches have more to think about in terms of how they prepare for audits. Like that's a function I'm looking at. I think if you've got good executive management there, you'll be able to figure out which pieces to keep in and which to send out. But they're still going to run accounts receivable. They're still going to run accounts payable. They're still going to do donor management. They still have all those pieces. I think the complexity there, like the expectation for reporting goes up. So maybe there with your outsource partner, you're really looking for what can you do to be audit ready? Yeah. Like if you've ever participated in the preparation for an audit, it's a pain if you don't know what you're doing. In the first year, like basically you want to quit. And then the second or third or fourth year, you get a little bit better. Those are the kinds of things I think I'd be looking for help with.
No, it's great. So we touched a little bit on some things you've seen happen for smaller churches. So what have you seen, mistakes that have gone wrong in larger churches in this area?
Well, let's see. I've seen large churches. I've seen the theft there. I don't think it's that uncommon for large churches to mismanage cash. Mm-hmm. And so I think like having a good vendor, having somebody that can help you understand, hey, look, you've got to budget your outflows differently in the summer. Like optimism and hope are not strategies. Like these are legitimate tensions. And the other thing I'd say is people are people. Small systems and big systems, we all want them to run. We want all those systems to run on trust. So that's what happens. And that's like trust gone awry is where these systems fall off the cliff. And that's what Paul's saying. He's like, I know you trust me. I want to avoid any appearance of criticism, even though I know you trust me. So big churches, so a lot of times when big churches have issues here, it's in the news. So you can just, fortunately, I have not been involved I haven't been involved in big churches where things were done improperly. Large churches face different set of challenges. Listen to Rick Warren sometime talk about the difficulty they had in securing the land that Saddleback is built on. Mm-hmm. And the peculiar complexity to that was because of the size of their church and the people that were in it, keeping things appropriately confidential because there were people in the church also bidding on the same land that Saddleback wanted to buy. Oh, wow. So we need to be above board and with integrity. I'm not saying Saddleback did anything wrong. That's not the point. I'm just saying that's not an issue you typically come across in a 50-person storefront church. Yeah. Trust is a big deal. Accountability is a big deal. And if you have an issue, like just pause and get eyes on it. Yeah, sorry. You brought up that thing with Saddleback all those years ago.
No, it's great. So I get the opportunity to meet with a lot of different churches all over the United States, and some of them, some we serve, other ones I've just heard about are in the middle of a financial challenge, where something was mishandled or something out of their control even happened, and something similar to what you mentioned. So this can be a really big blow to your church and the congregation and trust, and having to rebuild that. Churches that are walking in something like this right now, what would you say to them?
First of all, I feel you. That's tough. Nothing that happens is a surprise to God. So I'm gonna encourage you, pause, take a deep breath, over disclose. Like, it's okay. I one time had the offering for my church in my custody, and it was stolen. It wasn't my fault. I went and just told everybody, hey, the offering was stolen. Like, oh, okay. So you want as many eyes on everything as possible. Like, especially if you're having an issue, get some eyes. Now, that doesn't mean open up your books to everybody in a 3,000 person church. It does mean getting in some competent outside help that'll vouch for you. And that looks different in every situation. I one time had to tell a group of people about a $35,000 mistake. And this is how it happened. I was a chair of an organization that oversaw churches in a bunch of states. We were running, it wasn't stadia, we were running church planting through this organization. We had a situation where there's outside funding for a church plant. There was a transition in the back office, like we had things going on, and there was payroll being run for the church plant. The designated money for it ran out, and nobody knew because nobody was paying attention. And the church planters were just getting paid. I mean, it wasn't like they were getting rich on this. There was probably subsistence wages to them. We were a few months into it before we realized they'd overdrawn what their account was by $35,000. So then my job as the chairman of this organization was to get up in front of our constituents and say, hey, you know what? We had good intentions and we blew it. So we paused, we got eyes on it, we over disclosed, we walked through it, and that organization is still planting churches.
Oh, that's great. Well, man, this has been really good. I really appreciate your experience and your honesty and transparency about things you've experienced. Any last words today on, kind of what we're talking about?
Yeah, we began and we'll end with stewardship. Stewardship is a thing. Like, it's a thing, and it's not just giving. It's about how we manage everything that God puts in our care. And our churches, the front office, what happens in the weekend, what happens in our discipleship groups, that's under our care. But so is the back office. Back office functions are a stewardship deal. And Jesus gave us the script. If we want to be trusted with true spiritual riches, if we want our ministries to grow, if we want to have people to manage and disciple the lives and souls of people, God will not entrust that to us until we learn to manage the mundane.
That's really, really good. Ken, I am so grateful for your time today and your experience and knowledge. And I hope those of us that have been able to listen today can take pieces and implement them in their churches as they continue walking and doing what God's called them to do. We also, Stadia Bookkeeping's here for you. If you are looking for help, some of that, what Ken mentioned, set up a call with me, go to stadiabookkeeping.com. I'd be happy to talk to you about how we serve churches and how we can help take some of that burden off of you and add additional accountability and support. Ken, thank you again. This has been amazing. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.
Hey, thanks for the invitation. Have a good afternoon.